Fierce fighting continues in the city of Rodinskaya in the Donetsk region, and reports of its complete control by Russian troops are not true. The operational command Vostok reported this. Ukrainian units are also blocking the enemy's advance in Pokrovsk. The soldiers spoke about the situation on this section of the front. Russian invaders continue to operate actively in the west. Pokrovsk. The goal remains unchanged. Exit to the Grishin area, but all enemy attacks are blocked by the defense forces. Search and assault operations and the elimination of the enemy in urban areas are being carried out. In Mirnograd, Ukrainian units are holding defensive lines and eliminating the enemy on the approaches to the city. The situation in Rodinsky is complicated. The enemy tried to gain a foothold along the railway north of the city, as well as in the western districts. They were unsuccessful. From a report by the Operational Command East on Facebook, the Pokrovsk direction remains one of the hottest spots. Since the beginning of the day, Ukrainian soldiers have repelled nearly a third of all Russian attacks recorded on the front line in this sector.
From Pokrovsk in the north to Huliayapol in the south, there's a road, and along it, a water barrier. This could be a possible line where the enemy can be stopped. And according to the latest and most reliable information available to us at this time, our defense forces are currently operating right along this line. They are making significant efforts to push the enemy back through a series of counterattacks, working to hold their ground as firmly as possible, and striving to establish what can be considered a more or less stable and secure defensive line in this area.
The Ukrainian armed forces also called Russia's claim of controlling Kostyantynivka a myth. Ukrainian defenders posted a video and noted that the Russian army continues to wipe the city off the face of the earth.
I filmed it right in the house, in apartment 9.5.
In addition, the soldiers talked about the situation in the Chasiv Yar area. The enemy there is using worsening weather conditions and is trying to attack under the cover of snowfalls and limited visibility. The Russians are using aviation and rocket artillery. Ukrainian soldiers are destroying infantry, ground robotic systems, artillery pieces, ammunition depots, and the occupiers' vehicles. As for the situation in the area of Huliaypole in the Zaporizhia region, military experts note that this bridgehead will remain active going forward.
Most of all, I still consider it the southern Donetsk direction, meaning it's an attempt to occupy the entire Donbass. We're talking about Stepnohirsk, we're talking about Primorsky, where the enemy is currently conducting active operations, and of course the Orikhiv direction as well. This is already an attempt, so to speak, a kind of fire control that would bring the Russians, through fire control, closer to the outskirts of the city of Zaporizhia, the regional center. And this is our task. Accordingly, not to let the enemy achieve this. Obviously, they definitely won't manage to do it this year, and next year as well for that matter.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, just in the past day, 3 Russian tanks, 6 armored fighting vehicles, and 13 artillery systems were destroyed at the front. In addition, more than 100 units of Russian vehicles and special equipment were burned, and 305 UAVs. In addition, Ukraine's defense forces eliminated 1,180 Russian soldiers the day before, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Thus, in almost 4 years of full-scale war, Russian army losses have already exceeded 1,205,500 soldiers.
At the same time, the Kremlin dictator ordered the offensive on Zaporizhia to continue amid peace talks. This is being reported by Russian media. During a meeting on the war against Ukraine, he gave the order, and to continue holding the occupied part of Zaporizhia region and advance toward the regional center. Dictator, Putin stated that the Russian military is allegedly carrying out its assigned tasks. Their goal is to capture Zaporizhia. Chief of the Russian General Staff, Gerasimov, also reported on the alleged capture of the village of Lukyanovskoye and fighting in the city of Orikov. And now joining our broadcast is Alexei Haitman, retired major of the National Guard of Ukraine and military analyst. Alexei, good afternoon. We're glad to welcome you live on Freedom TV channel.
Hello?
Alexei, well, let's try to figure out why there's so much lying from the Russian information machine. But look, even if we talk specifically about the southern directions, and in particular about Zaporizhia, then Ukraine's defense forces once again had to refute the enemy's claims that their units are already literally 15 kilometers from the southern outskirts of the regional center. Why do they lie like that when everything is completely obvious?
This is pressure on us, on you and me. It's pressure on our servicemen who, willingly or not, react to this kind of information. And first and foremost, it's pressure on our partners, especially on the United States. Russians, well, we've already heard from Trump that there should be concessions from the Russian Federation. We've heard that each side should make certain concessions. And here are the concessions from the Russian Federation, according to Trump, it's that they decided not to seize the entire left bank of Ukraine, even though they could have done it. Basically as if it was out of the goodness of their hearts. In other words, not because they can't do it, but because they don't want to. And so this is supposedly their desire for peace. And to reinforce these kinds of manipulations, primarily by Trump, which unfortunately Putin manages to pull off, there's talk that they only have a little bit left to go. And now, if they just put in a little more effort, they'll supposedly achieve the goals they set for their so-called special military operation. Putin even said that they don't need any concessions from Ukraine regarding the withdrawal of our troops because they can achieve that themselves by using the capabilities of their armed forces that they already have. Well, that's pure fake news, pure nonsense. It's just the informational component of hybrid warfare and pressure, mostly aimed at our partners. We, for our part, are skeptical about it. Some people in our country might take this information seriously. Some realize it's complete rubbish. But the pressure isn't really on us. It's primarily on the United States. And?
But really, as we've said more than once before, in our on-air meetings, we've talked about how our job, yours and mine, is to explain to our viewers, those getting information in Russian in different countries around the world, what is actually happening. Take, for example, the situation with Kupiansk. They've already been caught in this particular case. On lies, on this nonsense, on these fakes. There have already been a huge number of such cases. Once again, they've claimed to have taken this poor Kupiansk. Now, the Russian Federation's Ministry of Defense is once again spreading fake videos about controlling this city. According to the Center for Countering Disinformation, the press service of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, all these videos only confirm that Russian troops do not control most of the city in any way. The drone footage shows a group of invaders moving through the streets of the settlement, but these shots are just another manipulation. In reality, the Russians are on the northern outskirts of Kupiansk, where they have been, and in fact, they are even retreating from there now. The Russian Ministry of Defense is trying to present the retreat of its troops as the capture of the city. Despite Russia's claim of taking Kupiansk, since the end of November, Ukrainian forces have controlled about 90% of this settlement. And again, well, it seems to me that if not everyone in the world, then at least the majority of people on the planet already know this. So why do it?
To sow doubt. It's about sowing doubt. Someone might actually, two parallel pieces of information are being spread. The first is information that they control, for example, Kupiansk. And the second piece of information is that Ukrainian, that is our media, various media outlets, are hiding something from us. So these two narratives, one that we're being lied to, that you and I are lying, that we're hiding something, and that in reality everything is very bad, make people start to doubt. Well, that's the goal. That's the kind of propaganda it is. It's actually based on certain textbooks on how this should be done. Well, at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations, for example, it's well known. Issues of information warfare and information sabotage are studied in the early courses. And it's simply spelled out in these manuals, what needs to be done and what the goal of such operations is. The goal isn't to convince you of a lie. Well, it's impossible to convince someone that Kupiansk is under control if it's obvious that it's not controlled by Russian forces. And the goal isn't to convince anyone of that. The goal is to sow doubt. So the aim, the ultimate aim, isn't to persuade people of a falsehood, but to plant seeds of doubt. Though unfortunately, they're sometimes able to pull this off. Especially among our partners in Europe, especially in the United States, when information is presented from the President of the Russian Federation, from the Chief of the General Staff's team, and, well, it's straight out of Goebbels' playbook. The bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it. And, well, I think Trump, as someone from a civilized country, just can't quite believe that someone could lie so brazenly. And that's why he and his circle allow for the possibility that maybe it's true. and that we're just hiding the truth. We are the ones hiding it.
Alexei, so let's try to figure out what's really going on with truth and lies on their side, especially when it comes to something like the losses in the Russian Federation's army. According to the statement by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrskyi, Russia is currently losing about 6 times more soldiers on the battlefield than Ukraine. And the daily losses of the Kremlin occupiers average about 1,000, 1,100 people. But just in the past 24 hours alone, it's 1,200 according to the General Staff's report. Where are they going to get people from? Who or what are they going to fight with? What do you think?
You've raised an important point. Let's try to go through this quickly, because it's a very broad question. You've asked it. Well, first of all, Syrskyi said, and we just heard this, that the army has grown. The Russian army on the battlefield, on the front line, by 8,000 to 9,000 every month. What does that mean? It means that what they were able to mobilize and what they were losing resulted in a net gain of 8,000 to 9,000. A net gain. So, in other words, their numbers were increasing. Starting from somewhere, I don't know if Syrskyi said this or not, but he mentioned it elsewhere. He talked about it, maybe not in this interview, that since around August, give or take, the number of Russian troops on the front line hasn't been increasing. In other words, unfortunately, the number hasn't been going down either. So that's pretty much how things are. Since around August, or even since midsummer, let's put it that way. This means that what they can mobilize is equal to what they're losing. Their numbers aren't increasing. The army, how can they increase those numbers? Well, they've already announced a partial mobilization, even though they announced it back in 2022, partially. The question is how they're carrying it out. They're also counting on foreign citizens. We know about Indian citizens, we know about citizens from Cuba and other countries who, when they end up as our prisoners, say that they were deceived. They supposedly came for work and then somehow ended up with a rifle in their hands and somehow started shooting at our soldiers. In reality, they thought they were just going to be laying bricks there at some construction site, but they're lying, trying to avoid responsibility that way. Responsibility. Let's be reasonable people and understand that those who came, how did they end up on the territory of the Russian Federation? They were lured there by deception for some kind of work. Russian emissaries travel all over the world and lure people in for work. Like they've got nothing better to do. So these are people who, in order to get Russian citizenship, Putin himself talked about this. I don't remember exactly, whether it's 6 months or a year you have to fight. In the armed forces of the Russian Federation, then you get automatic Russian citizenship. And on top of that, the financial rewards these soldiers receive are much higher than the financial opportunities available in their own countries. So they're coming for the money, not because they were tricked. Let's not kid ourselves here.
Absolutely, yes, there's no doubt about it. Alexei, thank you so much for finding the time to join us live today.